All right, I am starting this broadcast just a smidge early. I'm not going to start talking too early, but I wanted to be sure that I had everything up and running. So, as I wait for people to get on and for it to be 6:30, I want to be here. That way I can see you getting on and the broadcast is running. So let me just give you a few minutes to hop on. And if you're watching this recording, you can probably record or fast forward a little ways until we actually start the broadcast because we've got 2 minutes. But I wanted to be super proactive because this is actually my first time using this exact webinar software. So let's just make sure that everything's good and everyone can see me, you can hear me. I'm going to check my phone here to make sure we've got that up and running. And I promise, by the way, as you guys get on, I promise that this is not going to be as long as my last webinar because as you can, I mean, for those of you who know me, you know that I can apparently get really passionate about things and keep talking. Hi, Mikey. So I promise you it's not going to be that long. Mikey, were you on my last webinar? That was 1 hour and 52 minutes. Because I totally apologize for that if you were. But I did, you know what? I had apparently, unfortunately, no. Apparently, I had a lot of important information to share. However, typically, sorry, I'm looking at my phone just to make sure that this is going. Usually when I do a live workshop, whatever it is, it's about 45 minutes because I know that live in person, that's all people can handle attention span-wise. That's why we feed people food and give them water and sometimes Trulies or wine, just depending on their taste and their values. But when I'm doing a workshop, I try to keep it short and sweet. And that day I just apparently have really had a lot to talk about. So I really apologize for that. But I'm even in a new spot. We're trying to make a new filming room in our office. So this is one in the making. That's why I excuse the white walls. But we are we're in the process of a new film room. We obviously need some buffers on the wall here so it doesn't sound so echoey. But I'll send you the link. If you really want to listen to me talk for 1 hour and 52 minutes about childhood health, I will definitely do that because I'm super passionate about it. And if you want to listen, I will send you the recorded link. It's got to be somewhere. Okay, it's 6:31. So if you're on there, my walls are big. I know. I usually have so much stuff on my walls. I'm sorry. Okay, as you guys log on and you get on here, if you want to put in the chat where you're from, if you've heard me talk before, I'll probably recognize some of your names, but I saw a lot of people that were registered for this webinar who I wasn't familiar with. So that's awesome. I love to meet new people. I wish we were in person so I could actually meet you because the interaction that I get in person is, of course, a lot better than what you get through a computer screen. But for those of you who don't know me, I have been on a path of helping children win, really, helping kids get a voice and helping parents and educators really come into understanding them and being part of that empowerment for them and empowering parents, empowering educators to understand children and especially neurologically possibly compromised children, neurologically confused children, children that may have even gone through a neurological injury or insult of some sort, and their brain just isn't processing information right. A lot of them have what we would diagnose in the medical world, sensory processing. However, I'm not about diagnosing. I am all about looking at what's going well, what can be better about it, because I have an undying faith in the healing power of the human body, that our bodies were designed to be healthy, to self-heal, and to self-regulate, and that there's a lot of times where we are getting the output. The behavior is an output, And it's something often that's undesirable, but we're not looking at the input. And when we don't understand how the input and how the information got there, we can't possibly understand the output and what's going on and how to address it. I'm hoping my mom's watching this. She likes to watch a lot of my things. Hi, Mom. Because I was that child that had to know why. I was literally like, I can't move forward unless I have a why behind what's going on, and to put time and energy into this is what to do about it. So I often say when you're in a workshop with me, it's very little work to do. However, it is more about finding a why and less about a tool necessarily of here's a symptom, let's cover it up, or let's give you this new fancy thing in order to deal with the symptom. And instead it's understanding why might that behavior or why might that condition, whatever it might be arising in a child, and let's address that. And that way we know what to do and how to do it. Becomes a lot easier. And it's the same thing for the child. When they can understand why something might be occurring, they can then process what to do as well. So when I teach this class in a parenting and or teacher setting, we talk about the camps that people will live in. And many of us grew up in these camps, and parents will sometimes choose a camp or we rotate through these camps. And one is the authoritarian parent that is saying, this is what you have to do. Like, listen to me. It's because I said so. Sit still, sit down, do this. And it's very much, I'm going to tell you what to do. And there's very little thought. It's more of telling the child what to think instead of how to actually think for themselves. And I know we probably all fluctuate through all of these, and you're like, because I said so, sit down. And then there's also a passive or the permissive parent or teacher who just kind of lets the kid run the show. Hands off. I don't want to rock the boat. Don't tell me I have to make any changes. Very much just step back out of the situation. And then we have a group of very proactive parents and very proactive teachers that are looking at, okay, why is this going on? What's occurring? How can I now help or diffuse the situation in getting down to the heart of the child and why that behavior might be there in the first place? It's often, if we don't understand their heart, we can't really get down to why they might be feeling that way, instead of telling them they shouldn't be feeling that way or they shouldn't be behaving that way. I'm going to bring this down just a smidge. And instead, really figuring out why that behavior might be there in the first place. And it can be sometimes difficult to decipher, right? But if what we found out is when the brain and the body are talking most effectively and the most efficiently, and the communication is cleared up, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, then it is a lot easier to deal with an issue than it is with a compromised and a neurologically compromised child. So here's what we tend to see when we see a sensory issue. And this doesn't have to be a diagnosable one. We're all going to find out as we go throughout this workshop that many of us have sensory issues, and we tend to be sensory seekers or sensory avoiders. And the sensory seekers, you guys can just even imagine, they're the kids that don't sit still, they don't stop moving, they're humming, drumming, tapping their feet, looking for input. Wrestling is a rite of passage on here. You're the one-man band, you might be chewing on things, pencils are missing, erasers are missing, pen caps are chewed to oblivion. There's nothing left of it because their brain is looking for input. They're seeking sensory input. They're gonna love the mosh pits. And then we have people that are very hands-off or sensory avoiders, where there's bright lights, too much sound, the touch might really hurt, like you fall down and skin your knee and you're like, oh man, this really hurts, let me just show you. And you're like, man, I'm just being dramatic. I've even had dads be like, dude, my son's just a pansy. And you're like, he's really not, this is actually true. Even though you're touching them lightly and they say, ow, it's a real sense for them. It's really how their body's processing the information. And I had to leave this, for anybody and everybody who can't handle chewing. They can't handle the noise, they can't look at it, they can't watch it, and it might cause you to want to, cause you to plan and plot their death. It's a joke, but I like to have fun when I do my workshops. So when you're looking at what sensory processing is, You can read the slide, of course, if you'd like to, or if you're on a tiny little screen, I can also read it for you. But it's unlike blindness or deafness. It's unlike the other senses where they literally don't have the feedback that they need. Instead, it's an altered feedback where they have difficulty, apparently I'm having difficulty, bringing in the information through all of their senses. And there's more than 5 senses. I know it says that in here because I pulled the definition out of a dictionary. But there's your movement sense, there's your internal, your enteric sense, and your balance sense, so proprioception. Our brain has got to get feedback from all of those areas in order to make the best decisions. And with sensory processing, that's off. So it's sensed, but not perceived appropriately or perceived abnormally. And here's what we look at. Of course, as a pediatric chiropractor, I'm focusing on the brain and the central nervous system. We live our life through that nervous system. Everything we think, say, do, taste, smell, touch, everything has to be processed through that thing. And that's why all of us are, of course, very different, because it matters about our perception. Our life's going to play a huge role into this and our life experiences. However, when you look at somebody's nervous system who's stressed or compromised or in any way, shape, or form, and the senses are going to be compromised in some way, that's why we can all be sitting here watching the same movie or watching the same workshop online, doing the same things. We can all be in the same room together and experiencing very different emotions. Some might be hot, some might be cold, some might be alarmed, some might be intrigued, some might be excited, some people might be nervous or scared or worried about what's going to happen next. We all experience things very differently. And how we do that, of course, I say, is through your nervous system. It's gotta run the show. And what very little people will actually do is assess how that thing's running. We'll check our kids' eyes, ears, nose, throat, stomach, stool, urine. I mean, we'll check it all, blood, to find out if there's a problem instead of going back to that nervous system to figure out how is that nervous system getting information. If you remember me saying input equals output. And instead of examining just the output, let's figure out how the input is there and what to do about it. So this is a Bruce Lipton quote, and many of you have seen this before. If you've heard me talk, the function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment, both external and internal, and coordinate the behavior of all other cells. And often we'll see that, yes, the perception is off, often the coordination is off. The behavior is usually what we're looking at. We're thinking, is my child just being a brat and having huge meltdowns? Are they just being dramatic? Does it really hurt that bad? Is it really that big of a deal to transition from toys to dinner? Does bedtime really have to be a disaster? In a classroom, does sitting down and focusing really have to be a big deal? Are they just trying to get away with things? Are they trying to have control over the situation? And you start looking at this parenting battle of like, maybe I should be the authoritarian person, or maybe I should just step back and let them ride, or maybe I should figure out where it's coming from. And we're going to probably shuffle between those to try to decipher what's going on. And I got to tell you, when my son was first struggling, and this is what got me on the path, I'm going to share a little bit about his story, was that I couldn't figure out why he was having the meltdowns, why he was getting constant croup, why he couldn't hold a pencil, why he didn't want to make friends necessarily, why he was he was my sensory avoidant child. I was like, it's so different than his brother. I don't want to compare, but I'm reading the parenting books to try to figure out, how do I address these concerns? And of course, you get all sorts of opinions from them. You have spanking to, you're crazy opinion that's happening. And I didn't have the concept of what his brain and body might be going through and how it was receiving information differently than I was and feeling very different than I was. And one of the things that we examine is the fight or flight response. So many of you have heard me talk about the fight or flight response before. A lot of people are familiar with the fight or flight response, but that nervous system has 2 modes of operation. It's got the fight or flight, innate, inborn, freak out, defend myself, run from an enemy or a bear response. And then it also has a healing and repairing, digesting and growing response. This should be on at night. That's why infants and children require so much more rest than adults do, because they've got so much more happening than we do. We still have to rest and repair and heal from the stress of the day. But the more stress you experience and the more fight or flight is turned on, the more we start to get wired this way. And that's so vitally important in children, because from birth to 3, they're making 1 million new neurological connections a second. In 1 second, they're making 1 million new neurological connections. That's mind-blowing. Their brain and body is developing right now at a rapid pace. And it starts to decelerate a little bit, but in our 30s and 40s, we're making that many in a year. So we make 1 million new neurological connections in a year in our 30s and 40s, which is still good news. So because our brain is always changing, it's always learning, but it can also start getting trapped in that fight or flight response. And it's when that perpetual cycle starts to occur is when we run into trouble. So when somebody's fight or flight response is triggered, when there's a threat that's there, there's a lot of things that happen. You first are going to start breathing with your chest, kind of like I just did to describe it, right? Shortened breaths. Your senses become heightened. You need to look around to figure out where to run, flee, or fight. So the ears are going to be turned way up to listen. The eyes, the pupils are going to be dilated to see. The touch, the sensors on your body to be able to run from the enemy if you need to, and the blood is going to be shunted from the vital internal organs out to the limbs. The heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, and those limbs are ready to fight or flee. And instead, what's missing out is that parasympathetic nervous system, your immune system, your digestive system doesn't get the attention that it needs when you're in a constant state of fight or flight. We talk about it as flipping your lid. So in your brain, you've got your prefrontal cortex. Now, this is the higher, calm, organized, creative brain center where a lot of learning occurs. And we know that's not fully developed, especially in boys until later on in life, in their mid-20s. However, this guy has got to develop appropriately and be able to inhibit or stop the fight or flight response, which is the hindbrain. The hindbrain is the amygdala, and this brain is very reactive and it's very impulsive. And what we know, and as a parent and as a teacher or a care provider of any sort, we know that when this thing is triggered and that child is stressed, that there's not learning that's occurring. There's also not rational organization. There's not rational thought. They're not going to sit while you logically talk to them about they shouldn't be having a meltdown. They should be sitting down and focusing when they're all on out fight or flight. And like I said, the senses are turned up. So yes, there is a child that might feel like things hurt and might be uncomfortable. You might not want to wear clothes or pants or socks or put lotion on your skin or brush your teeth. And some people might think, wow, you know what? This kid is just a spoiled little brat, but really those senses have been dialed up so far for so long, and nerves that start firing together are wiring together, and the child starts becoming more of a fight or flight person and a go-to in that fight or flight response where you get a loose lid. A really loose lid is where you start living. And the most amazing thing that we found through chiropractic research and the adjustments, when you're hooking the body up and the brain and the spinal cord up to the electrodes and you're delivering a chiropractic adjustment, the only place that it's changing is in the brain. And only is a limiting term, but also to accentuate the brain. The brain is what changes. It helps inhibit that fight or flight response. It helps connect the brain and body. It helps with the higher brain centers. It helps with the creative thought. It helps with the rational thought instead of living in fight or flight when the senses are up, when chewing is too loud for them to handle, when they can't go into the classroom with bright lights or into grocery stores, it's too overwhelming. And what do when it's too overwhelming? When the senses are too heightened, they typically act out because now their body's taking in information at a faster, more rapid pace than we are. There's more input, and you're going to see the output. You're going to see the behavior. Now they're hurting, I'm going to hurt you because I don't know what to do with how my body's feeling, and the stress has to go somewhere. Stress can't just disappear it has to dissipate. And so you're going to see it leave the body. It'd be really great if we didn't have to process stress, wouldn't it? Like, man, I don't really want to process that stress I just went through. That'd be great if we could just have it disappear. But it doesn't happen that way, unfortunately. The body's got to be able to work through it. And there's been people that have been researching this and looking at it for a really long time. What's going on with sensory processing in the parasympathetic nervous system and the fight or flight response, and what we've known through the research. And I know that's super tiny, but it's a research article. I can send you guys the links if you're interested in research after this as well. When we're looking at children with sensory issues, they're lacking parasympathetic tone, and they're using a heart rate variability to measure this. And the kids that are having a lot of sensory issues are really lacking that parasympathetic control and tone in the vagus nerve. And if you've heard me talk about the vagus nerve before, that beautiful nerve is that gut-brain connection. That beautiful nerve is the braking system. That beautiful nerve runs the parasympathetic side of the nervous system, and it's got a large control over helping pump the brakes, slow down, heal, and repair from fight or flight, if it can do its job. And when the tone is low and it's restricted, it can't do its job. And that nerve is really, really important to be freed up. And what we found once again through our research is that the tone of the vagus nerve is also increased through chiropractic adjustments. So this is my next research study I'm going to show you as well. But so we measure this. We measure this in our neurological scans to monitor the body and watch the process that it goes through healing as they get a tighter lid, as their body can shift over into parasympathetic and slow down and take in less information and calm down and not have such a fight or flight response, and their senses can be sensed appropriately. And when that starts to happen, the brain starts to be able to regulate itself. Remember, I told you the body and brain are self-healing, self-regulating mechanisms. It's a very intelligent system doing the best it can with what it has. And once it starts to calm down, it can take in information appropriately, and a conversation of that was inappropriate is much better with an aligned person than it is somebody that's stuck in fight or flight, or somebody that's taking in too much information. They're probably not even hearing what you're saying. If you're someone that's even watching me and stuck in fight or flight, you're like, there's so many words, there's so much going on, I can't necessarily comprehend what she's saying. You might also be feeling stuck in that fight or flight response and constantly feeling short of breath, really exhausted, having a low ability to deal with stress. The adaptability there is low. You might be really short fused. When there's stress that's been stuck inside of your body, we get the same exact reactions, and you're just like, that kid's freaking out, like you want to freak out, and that's when you turn into the authoritarian parent to be like, don't do that. Or you're just like, I'm out, I tried the yelling, screaming, spanking, whatever it was, didn't work, and I'm done. So I'm just going to watch him do whatever he wants to do, because I don't have the time or energy to put the input into it or to be proactive. And here's the unfortunate part that we don't really realize is that much of this happens at birth. And I know that this could be a very bold statement for some people to be like, oh, really? Birth? Yes, birth. I'm going to show you a quick video on that. However, 99 out of 100 infants we've found have neurological compromise, interference, processing information inappropriately from birth. They found this study, this is a 2015 study, once again, I can send this to you, that looked at infants from small neurological interference to large neurological interference and the outcome on their health, which is a huge thing to look at when you're looking at a child, because not very many people correlate that to the birth. And some moms know innately something happened during the birth process. Some people definitely know there's huge trauma during the birth. The baby came out bruised, cone head, smashed on their face, and they were in the NICU, or the cord was wrapped. They were emergency C-section. They had to come yank them out. Some people know that there was some neurological insult that was there, or they know that there's something happened. They just don't quite know what it did to their child. And here's what we see. in our office is often that there was a pregnancy struggle as well, or a challenge, or sometimes fear or anxiety or trauma during the pregnancy, maybe a difficulty getting pregnant. There might be a loss right before the pregnancy causing more worry. I've had some patients that have really big traumas during pregnancy, the loss of a home, the loss of a loved one. There's some big things that our body processes, and our baby gets our nervous system. Our baby gets our chemical bloodbath, or whatever we're feeling, the baby's feeling. And that was my struggle with Landon, not knowing I was, setting the stage for him to have a neurological challenge because I was feeling stressed during that pregnancy. I was opening a new business. I had just moved in the middle of a town I'd never been to before. I'm still here and I love it, but I didn't know a soul around me. And there was a lot of stress that was occurring inside of my body, not knowing. I also had a 2-year-old, that three-year-old, that he was getting those same stress responses that I was having, and I was setting him up for it. And here's what I always say to moms, because moms are very much, we very much will blame ourselves for like, oh my gosh, it's totally my fault. That's how I was constantly, like, oh man, I'm parenting this kid wrong, or I'm doing things wrong, or oh, now I did this wrong, and you're just, honestly, you're doing the same thing. You're doing the best you can with what you have. And so far I haven't met a professional parent. We're all amateur parents, raised by amateurs, doing the best we can with what we have. But what we'll see is we'll blame ourselves. And what I want to tell moms right now is to look at the windshield. It is much bigger than the rear view mirror. You might need to check it to see where you've been, to understand where you're going. But let's focus on the windshield and take a peek back to say, okay, here's where it possibly came from. And I hope it answers some of the why questions for parents who maybe even all along in their gut knew something may have happened during that stressful pregnancy, or during that stressful birth, or during the time. Here's what I'll see. I'll see some moms who are like, I had a perfect pregnancy, right? I had kale chips, I was doing yoga, I had no stress in my life, everything was great. But that perfect pregnancy and baby had to get from the uterus to the outside world. And what happens between uterus and outside world is a really big deal. And I had no idea until I was a pediatric chiropractor and started to analyze this and figure out what exactly was going on. Is a matter of the duration of stress. Is a matter. I'm going to answer that in a minute, or maybe Brooke, tell me a little bit more about what you're asking there, and I'd love to answer that question. But yeah, if you're talking about like it was a sustained amount of stress the entire time, yes, short bursts of stress, not as big of a deal. But we'll often see, and what we can tell in the infant after they're born, is they're stressed in their colicky. They've got a reflection. Remember, input equals output. Their output tends to be a difficulty adapting to the outside world. And they can only tell us through cries, in tears and discomfort, or maybe not nursing or not latching, not digesting food appropriately, that they're stressed somewhere inside of their body. And here we go, is sitting upright, maybe trying to crawl or walk. They get their first tooth. The ears aren't draining the food appropriately because they're stressed in the upper cervical spine from the birth. I'm going to show you that next. And they get their first ear infection, maybe antibiotics. They continue into a toddler that feels stressed, hyperactive. Remember, input equals output. Now they need to bring that next sense into play a lot more, which is proprioception and balance, when they're walking and running and falling and all the things that they're doing to neurologically develop. And they might have ear tubes, the terrible 2s turning into the terrible 3s. And now we're asking these kids that are feeling stressed out, that their senses are turned up, they've had too much of that flipping of the lid, fight or flight response, to go to school, to sit still, to focus, to listen, and to learn. And they're not able to do it while we're asking them to. Their bodies physically cannot handle that when they are stuck or experiencing sensory issues, trying to understand the difference between stress during pregnancy versus the birth process. So, Brooke, when I'm looking at that, I'm looking at, did mom possibly set the stage for the baby to even have an accelerated stress response if there was stress there in both the pregnancy and the birth. So say mom is super stressed during the pregnancy, worry. I was worried. I'd had a miscarriage right before I was pregnant with Landon, so I was worried I was going to lose the next pregnancy. I was also stressed from starting a new business, and he's getting those hormones. So I was almost predestining him to have this stress response because you get your mother's nervous system. So whatever I'm thinking, saying, doing is also going into the baby. The same chemicals that I have, cortisol and the stress response going to the baby, they're getting that as well. If I have a totally chill, peaceful birth, everything's wonderful and great, and then there's stress during that process, we're going to see it as well as more of a physical stress than it is that emotional connection. But there can be stress in both. And when we start to see all 7 of these, or 5 is where I'm at right now talking, it's really just setting them up. It's like more stress and more stress and more stress. And you just keep triggering that fight or flight response over and over and over again. And now wiring the child for more stress. And by the time we get teens in, they're typically either anxious or depressed, maybe a combination of the two, and are having a really hard time balancing life now with social life, with now adding in all these hormones, and they're just feeling emotionally out of control. And especially right now when they haven't, their friends have been absent for so long, they might, it'd be on a screen to text them, but that social interaction is missing with peers right now for teens. And I'm seeing a lot more teen anxiety, depression, and exhaustion that's coming in our office currently, even more so than it was before. And then we'll see the burnt out, stressed out adult. We're exhausted by this time. There's only so much stress our body can go through at any given moment in time before it finally says, I'm done. This is too much. I'm exhausted. And that's low energy. And sometimes this is a steady decline where you don't really notice that you've gotten to this point of, wow, I feel super tired and fatigued, but it had been such a gradual decline, and we almost buy into the lies of that's just a part of aging. You're supposed to get old and beat up and bent out of shape, and bones are supposed to pop and crack. You're supposed to be tired and lethargic, and that's really a lie. Our bodies are designed to be self-healing, self-regulating, have the right amount of energy, the right amount of input into the brain so that you can get the right amount of output even as an adult. And we do see a lot of exhausted, stressed, burnt out adults. Some are on antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication because they're now looking for a chemical alteration to help their brain be able to process the incoming information or lack thereof because they've gotten to that fatigue point. So here's a birth that I want to show you. And it's kind of tricky. I'm going to leave my screen just for a hot minute to get over to it and show you guys this, but this is part of a stress response. Now, my child that I'm talking about in particular, and who got me down this path and all of his struggles that he had neurologically, was a very fast home birth. It was a long labor turned into very fast home birth, but that I didn't consider it being a stress until I looked at it a little bit later. And I'm going to show you how a scheduled cesarean section happens. And this is where I'll typically see when we're talking about a lot of physical stress during a birth. This is what we're looking at, and this is non-emergent, so this is scheduled. These doctors are very lackadaisical in their approach right now. Like, they're not in an emergent state. They're whistling while they're working. They're not looking, at anything as a stress response. So let me just play this for you, and I'm gonna have to go over to the screen over here and make sure that you guys can watch this video.
Irritated.
And I don't know if you guys can hear the volume, but I'm going to turn up my volume so you can.
All right. Ears of a girl. Ears of a girl. Make you cute for the camera.
Oh, man. Keep coming back. You did good.
There you go.
All right.
Look at those big old testicles, though.
Okay. So let me get back to my screens here. So I don't know how many of you have seen a cesarean section. I show this video often because there's very few times people will sit and digest a birth and watch it with intricate detail. I've had the privilege of watching lots of cesarean section births over and over and over again, and even patients have brought in their C-section births to watch to see the manner in which their child was born. And the truth of the matter is, cesarean sections save lives. I had my youngest was born via cesarean section scheduled. I would have died without one. I had a complete previs, so placentas over the cervix, like he's not coming out of my vagina. I'm grateful that that had occurred. The World Health Organization, which right now is subjective and who wants to trust them, does say that cesarean sections, about 5 to 10% of those that occur were actually medically necessary. And so it's getting up to 30, 40, and 50% of babies that are being born via cesarean section. And unfortunately, when you watch that film and you see the manner in which the baby was brought into this world, you know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you would never allow anyone to handle your child that way moments after birth, let alone before that baby's even touched gravity, felt air, light, anything other than the mom's, gentle developing womb, and they're brought into the world by their head and neck, and we know how delicate the fibers are. We're constantly being like, watch the head and neck when you're passing the baby around from parent to to grandparent. Everyone wants to make sure they have the head or neck first, instead of looking back to say, was there possibly a compromise during the birth that might be altering the senses to the body and to the brain and the way that my baby's getting information? Because often if they're injured or hurt, they can't tell you. But what we'll see is a stressed baby. What we'll see is a baby that doesn't want to nurse or latch or use the mechanisms of the swallowing technique, of thrusting the tongue, of maybe a tongue tie, which will typically what somebody will look at to say, oh, this baby needs a tongue tie revision. We'll get the revision and nothing necessarily changes. That's when we know that wasn't necessarily a structural compromise as much as it was a neurological compromise. And that's why we see a lot of infants in here, and then they're uncomfortable, they're screaming, they're crying. Babies should be eating, sleeping, and pooping, not screaming and crying and uncomfortable and gassy and unable to digest their food and arching their backs. But that's the only way that they can tell us what's going on. So let me apparently I have to reopen my slides here. I apologize for that. Let me get my screen view back in play here, and we're gonna do a little Blair Witch Project. I'm sorry this didn't happen last time I ran through these slides, but we're gonna do it quick and fast and furious. So this is what I'll see when a child's been up against gravity, when I know there's a neurological compromise young, probably at the birth process or during the birth process. Same thing for my son, a really fast birth. Wasn't ready for it. His body and brain didn't get the nice squeeze that it needed to be able to come out. It was like a little bit ahead and kaboom, he just came flying out. And that was also traumatic, me not knowing it. I just wanted to hold my baby, right, and see it. You're just having that euphoria, not even thinking about there's a possibility that there was an injury there. And the medical textbooks say over 60 pounds of pressure can be put on the head or neck of a baby during normal vaginal delivery. And we've been doing this research for a really long time. Since the 80s, we've been measuring neurological insult in babies during vaginal deliveries and now during cesarean sections. And they're starting to monitor it, but unfortunately, you can tell those doctors don't have ill intentions for that baby. However, if they were to become the pediatrician, instead of washing their hands and turning that baby over to mama, and they had to care for that child later on, they might start to realize, hey, you know what? The kids that were born that way tend to have a little bit more of an issue with sleeping, with being able to latch, with feeling comfortable, with colic. And as they go on with ear infections and drainage and antibiotics and ear tubes and tonsils, the whole escalade that we see occurring in children. And by the time they get to my office, often and unfortunately, we're looking at a child who is neurologically compromised to the state of, now I'm going to freeze up, I'm not going to move because there was a neurological insult. And we know that those delicate fibers of the spinal cord and this red organ that's right there, our brainstem, has been compromised. And this is air traffic control right here. that brainstem does vestibular balance. It does all the input to the brain. When you're looking at a child who's stuck like this, and all of you can, when your kids wake up in the morning, if they're still running around and you have them stand and face a wall and look straight ahead, and you can look at the height of the ears, the shoulders, the rotation of their head, their nose maybe even, and know that they're stuck like that to varying degrees. And this is typically what we see when they get into our office. Now the sensory input's been altered. Now they're up against gravity. They've started to walk, move, and that stuck and altered input to the brain is also going to stick and alter the senses to the brain. We've got a large check system that we're doing on the body, but one of the things that we know is that the way the body moves is how the brain takes in information. So if a kid's really fast and moving all the time and really rapid, we know that the brain's taking in a ton of information. Those are usually our sensory seekers. Then, yes, I can send you that video. Absolutely. Oh, it was. Darn it. Sorry, Teresa. I will send it to you. Sorry, it was glitching. We know that if they're a little bit slower and unorganized, the brain's moving just a little bit slower and it's a little bit less disconnected. They're usually our sensory avoiders. They're also typically the kids with some speech issues and vision issues. They're usually a little bit more emotional. They have a harder time connecting the dots. The coordination is off. And this is my son, Landon. Yes, sorry, I'll give you guys the video. That's too bad. I'm sorry it wasn't glitchy on my end, so I'm super sorry. I didn't realize that happened. Absolutely. So in that upper cervical spine is what's bringing in the input. And a lot of kids will already have come to me when they've been to possibly OT or speech therapy or behavioral therapy or counseling, when parents have been trying to deal with that output issue with the behavior and hadn't evaluated the input, hadn't evaluated the brain and the body to figure out. I would also love the recording. Yes, absolutely. Mikey, right? It's going to alter the input to that brain. And here's the deal. When there's proprioception that's coming to the brain that's been altered, it's going to look for input in other areas, and the areas of high dense. So proprioception is balance, and input to the brain is good, calming, organized food for the brain. They're going to look for it somewhere else. So they're going to be looking for it in other areas of high dense proprioceptive receptors, which is going to be in the hands. Those are my nail biters, my chewers, my fidgeters, my knuckle poppers, in the jaw. So those are also my chewers, oral fixations, and talkers, the groin, or the feet. And those are usually my movers and my shakers as well, tapping the feet, moving their feet around because their brain's looking for input. It wants input. That's how it's fed, is through proprioception. It's actually 60% from the spine, more than half from the upper cervical spine. So when it can't get that input and the brain has been altered from typically, honestly, the birth is what I see. About 85 to 90% of the time we're looking through birth history and we see that there was some sort of intervention that was used, whether it was an epidural, Pitocin, a little clip, mom was on her back, not using gravity to help assist the baby out, vacuum, C-section, forceps, cord wrapped. Unfortunately, my sister had this situation as well, where she had a nice, peaceful water home birth. The cord was wrapped 2 times around my nephew's neck. And that's a really big deal. That's a huge tug of war. And that's how they figured out the baby didn't want to go from breech where he was until right before birth where he turned, because he had a short cord that was around his neck. Babies are usually very intelligent and they're not going to cut off an oxygen or blood supply to themselves. So what is the treatment for vestibular or proprioceptive sensory? If Siri, are you talking as far as chiropractic is concerned? Oop, I just lost my slides again, or I switched myself around. And what we're looking at, put it in the comments and I'll answer your question as best as I can. So what I often will say, yes, okay. So what I'll often say is chiropractic is never a treatment for anything. We don't treat anyone. However, what we do is remove neurological compromise and interference, let the brain and body communicate most effectively, and it's going to take care of the rest. So it's not necessarily a oh, this child's in for proprioception and balance, or this child's in for behavior issues, or this child's in for bedwetting or ear infections, that's typically when mom or dad bring them in. They say, oh my gosh, you know what, this child is struggling with X, Y, and Z. What we do is evaluate their nervous system to see, is there compromise? Is there interference? Is there something going on? And we'll measure it in our non-invasive neurological scans and look at it and say, okay, here's where the input's off. This is what's going on. We're going to remove that neurological interference. We're going to make sure the brain and body can talk appropriately. And honestly, Siri, yes, adults can too, Mikey. Honestly, Siri, probably 85 to 90% of the children that I see, we're first working in the upper cervical spine to get that input right, because that's not talking appropriately. It's jammed up, it's locked up, senses have been altered, vestibular function up there. There's a huge relay system up there for your respiratory, your immune system. There's so much going on in that brainstem. If you guys remember when Superman, Christopher Reeves, had his accident, he broke his upper cervical spine and lost all function. I mean, we saw him just obviously not live without all of the, surgery and ventilators and no speech. So when we look at the body as a whole, and we even look at just a little bit of neurological compromise in the most important system in the body near that brainstem, we know it's going to alter the way that the body is taking in information and how it's able to communicate with the brain. And there's a lot of different, I don't even know what to call it, effects, really. We're going to call it an effect of neurological stress inside of a body, and it's going to manifest in different ways, and behavior is going to be off in different ways. They might be sensory seeking, they might be sensory avoiding, they might just be having meltdown central, they might be doing a combination of the two, and I do see that as well. And we measure the stress on the nervous system and we look at it and say, okay, this child, whether or not they have this behavior, maybe an attachment to a screen, which I'll talk to you about in just a moment. And we can't get it away. It's like an addiction, right? Or I can't get them to try anything other than crackers and cheese. They won't eat anything else. This is their food source. It's typically the way the body's taking in the information and what it's desiring than it is necessarily the child. They might get into a habit of it, but when you're under a state of constant fight or flight and information coming into your body, what you want to do is control the situation. You want to know the outcome. You want to know what your day looks like. You want to know what the food's going to taste like. You want to know what's happening next. But you need to be in control because you can't handle any more stress or input to the brain. And the brain, when it's under fight or flight, only wants really quick food. I have so many kids coming around. I was like, he doesn't want to eat anything other than, crackers and pretzels. Well, the brain just wants simple sugar to break down. That's all it wants. It wants to break it down. It wants to get a quick energy release and be able to continue on its job of this self-perpetuating cycle of taking in information, rather than sit down, enjoy a nice, luscious, salad with crunchy vegetables involved in it. It doesn't have time for that. It is literally running from a bear. It's taking in too much information. People are talking, people are chewing. I was asked to sit still. My brain needs input. That's a lot for some kids. And those are sometimes the kids that are in behavioral or feeding therapy that are to that point, but it's typically, honestly, the input. That's what we see. And we'll even see kids that have failed other therapies. They're like, oh, we got, maximum benefit out of this, and it was just a little bit. When we come in and we measure the stress that's on their nervous system, we say, you know what, they're compromised by this amount. That's all the benefit it could get, because that's the way the nervous system has been running. You should try to calm it down and try to use tips and tools and tricks, which I'm all for, supplements and essential oils and weighted blankets and weighted chest things and talking things through. I'm so for all of those tips and tools. I mean, I tried sticker charts. I tried everything I could with Landon. And this is my son over here. And this picture of him, he's now 10. I tried it all because I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do with this kid and what's his life going to look like later? If he can't control himself emotionally from 3 years old, and when he was about 5, when we started to really discover there was an issue going on with him, that this isn't making sense. He's not learning well. He's not adapting well. He's not sleeping well. He's not talking well. He's not seeing well. I mean, there's so many things that he had going on. I couldn't take another step forward in the direction of another tip, tool, trick, therapy until I understood where it was coming from in the first place. And like I said earlier, we test everything. I mean, I had his eyes, ears, nose, throat. You check everything, blood, stool, urine, you're checking it all. And I hadn't even checked the most important system in the body, the brain and the central nervous system, to see how it was operating, because I wasn't trained in it yet. I wasn't given that toolbox. It was a very basic one from school that can take care of very basic conditions. And I didn't know I needed neurological based advanced care to understand children and how their nervous systems were developing, how it brought in input, how it might possibly get off, how stress affects it, how they develop, the algorithms that occur in there. So my own kid had it. And once I helped him, and I saw the heartache that was there with him and how he felt about himself, how his siblings felt about him, how our marriage was going because of this altered input, and my husband and I being, he's an authoritarian parent and I'm more of the proactive parent, sometimes a permissive parent. If I'm just like, dude, do whatever you want right now, I don't have time for you. You know, it was the marriage was very tense when we're like, we don't agree, right? Because this child had been compromised. And as soon as we could get his nervous system balanced and taking in information appropriately, could we really address some of the other issues? But they honestly all fizzled away. They took care of themselves because the body is self-healing and self-regulating. So yes, Mikey, adults can come under chiropractic care as well. We often will say that there's parents that are living the same wave as their child, right? If your child's experiencing a lot of stress, you're riding that stress wave with them, and there's some PTSD that occurs with that, and you're waiting for that same reaction that they typically have. You know, I'll talk to parents about kids that'll have 2-hour meltdowns. Like, I can't get her, to settle down and self-regulate in 2 hours. What's the parent doing during those 2 hours? Probably not eating bonbons on the couch, right? You're worried about your kid. And then they start to self-regulate. I just sat down with a family today, and we had talked about their child had tried everything. They'd been through everything, right? So they're sitting down with me saying like, oh, okay, lady, like, somebody told me to come to you. Can this really help? And we took a look at the body and said, in her nervous system, and said, what you've been doing so far has been great. It's helped not pour salt on the wound, let's just say. You weren't salting the wound. The wound is still there. It's not being irritated as much because you weren't salting it, because you've been helping take care of it. But what we need to do is rip this Band-Aid off, and we need this wound to heal. And we've been doing it. You guys, it's been 3 weeks, and the family's like, oh my gosh, like, her meltdowns are super short. She's really agreeable. She's in a good mood, right? You're almost like waiting for the next shoe to drop as the family, because you've been dealing with this for so long. But you need to have just an undying faith in the human body that it can self-heal, it can self-regulate, it can be healthy, it can make appropriate choices. And when it's connected is when you can have the best conversations, because someone with an altered input to their brain, you've all talked to them before, you're like, where are you getting your information? Or like, why are you freaking out right now when this is like a normal conversation? We've all been there with people like, whoa, sister, cut someone off in a parking lot, and they want to just lose it, and you're like, this person has experienced a lot of stress. Their body's probably stuck in fight or flight. We were just their tipping point. Do they typically require OT or other services afterwards due to formed habits of sensory avoidance or sensory seekers? It kind of depends, Brooke. It really does. I have had a mixed handbag, I would say. But for the most part, some of the things that when I'm thinking of older children, and I don't know which age child you're thinking of, where they have been compensating for such a long time in the way that their brain receives information, that some of those fine motor issues had to be resolved more so than younger kids who are still neurologically developing at a really, really rapid rate. So I'm talking like 9, 10 kids that were unable to read at that point, or maybe dyslexia they were experiencing, or some sort of processing information at that point. Some of these kids are my toe walkers as well, that were having a harder time taking in that information. They kind of had to relearn. So we got them a reading tutor in order to help them understand now how their brain's processing information. So it really depends. We really sit down and look at, okay, here's what's going on. And we get the family a game plan to say, here's the care that they're going to need to get the stress off of their system. And then this is what it's going to require to keep it there, to balance it. We never tell a parent like, all right, see you later, come talk to me when it's back. Typically not. We work really closely with a parenting coach if it is something parenting that it's a big deal. Maybe parents are on the opposite end of the spectrum. And sometimes, there's parents that are separated where it's a very different lifestyle in one home compared to the other home. And the child has to process that stress. We've seen a lot. Honestly, we've seen a lot, and some of those kids just require counseling because of the way that family dynamic runs to help weed through all of the stress that's there. So every case is really, really individualized for us. That's why we run a very thorough case history. We sit down with the family, we look at, here's what's going on, here's the stress that we're experiencing, here's the things that we've tried, or this is what we've done so far, and it doesn't have to be anything. People have asked me like, do I have to have removed all sugar, grain, dairy, and tried all these other things before I can come to you? I'm like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. If we take care of the main focal point, the brain and the central nervous system, and get that thing balanced out, any other therapy, any other dietary changes, essential oils, things just work even better than it had with altered input to the brain. So it really depends too, Sierra, and how many visits might it take. It can take anywhere from about 90 days is where we really get a good change out of a system, up until 6, 8, 9 months. Now I have a teenager that's in right now who's 15, who has been through everything. Of course, the poor guy has got atrocious amount of diagnoses. And when we take a look at the manner of which he was born, he was breached, they tried to turn him, didn't work, it was failed, that's a lot of trauma, cesarean section, and we've led down this neurological insult path to the point of the stuck, now depressed and anxious child that has a spectrum diagnosis, ODD, OCD. The amount of stress that was in his system and the amount of unwiring we need to do and new neurological connections we need to build back up, he's going to be in here for 18 months. That's where I'm at over here with some of the more severe cases. Younger kids with less stress need less care. So what we do is scan the nervous system and get a game plan with the family after we've gone through the case history, after we've seen the child, and we say, here's what it's going to take, here's the number of visits, and here's the financial investment that's going to be involved in this. Patients often will choose, here's my care plan options. You can get discounts based on, I'm going to choose monthly, I'm going to pay in full. Because when they're in more frequently, making a neurological change in the beginning and learning something new, it's going to take repetitive visits throughout the week. And then we're going to be able to get their body balance out and get to less visits. And because of the dense and condensed frequency there, we're able to spread payments out for families to make that a lot more easy and digestible. 3-year-old and myself, yes, Brooke, right? We often have moms and children alike coming in and get both people taken care of. And I was actually talking to a patient today who was like, I have this internal battle of, are my kids going to get better if I'm still reacting the way I'm reacting, and if I just bring myself in, are they going to get any better because now I'm reacting to their behavior and then I'm not going to get better. They just people play this tug of war in their mind. And I'll usually say, just get in line, pick a priority if you have to. Choose that child and then get in line, or both together, because you're making the drive, and multiple times a week really seriously makes sense for most families. I saved this picture because this was one of my pictures of a defining moment in my life with my son Landon. That vagus nerve, yes, you know what, Siri, that is involved with our adjustments. What we found is through gentle, safe, and effective chiropractic adjustments with our hands, that vagus nerve tone is freed up and able to engage, and that gut-brain connection is restored. The parasympathetic nervous system starts to work appropriately. We measure that on our scans as well, and we watch that body balance out and not feel like it's in a state of fight, flight, or fear, nor do we want it healing, repairing in parasympathetic while you're sitting during the middle of the day. That's nighttime, but that's more an exhausted model of a nervous system. We want it balanced. And we want the autonomic nervous system, so everything that is on autopilot, which is 300 trillion bits of information every second, which is just wild. We want that balanced and as high up in this box that I can show you when you come in as possible. That way your body is much more adaptable. So here's a picture that I was going to share with you guys that I shared in some of my other presentations. That was a defining moment in my life when I realized that Landon really, it wasn't that he didn't want to learn, it was that he couldn't learn. Because I thought he was just avoiding work. And I thought he just wasn't interested in school. And it was really that he couldn't. And I had him write his name down on a piece of paper. He was looking at a picture of his name. And I had to write it down, and I said, oh, can you write your name? He had no idea that it's Landon. He was just trying to copy what something looked like. And I don't even know how big that is on your screen and if you could see it, but it's super light and it says Landon. That's how disorganized his brain was. And I had sent it to a friend who was early childhood intervention, and she was like, oh, wow, he's got some sort of, processing disorder. You should really go have him evaluated at the, infant toddler program at the time. Because his kindergarten teacher told me that he couldn't go to kindergarten, like he just couldn't learn, and he was in a Montessori program. So 3 to 6 years old, he had been in her class the whole time. She's like, he's not interested in learning, he doesn't want to learn, but it's actually that he can't learn. And I literally had no idea, and that kind of, my world kind of had come crashing down that day from he can't go to kindergarten to, he's got a processing disorder, and I'm like, what am I going to do with this kid? Like, I don't know what school's going to look like for him. I don't know what his life is going to look like, his relationships. He already can't say his name well, and speech is off, vision's off, and it's just a gamut of things. And it sent me down this path of neurological based care when I found another chiropractor that had been working with kids like Landon, like yours, and like all of the sensory kids, spectrum kids, the apraxic kids, the kids with just behavior issues that we don't have a diagnosis for, and we see the altered input to the brain. He'd been working with them for over a decade and had set up an advanced training program. So of course I was all over it. I was all over getting neurological scans, getting the training. We do ongoing training every single week with this entire system to understand how a child is neurologically developing and how the neurological stress gets there, and some of the algorithms and what leads down a path of the brain not getting the right information. And not a lot of people are talking about this, nor do they know to seek a pediatric based chiropractor. And I got to tell you what, my eyes were opened up to just the magical world of the human body and what its capabilities were once I removed Landon's neurological interference. He started connecting the dots almost like a month into neurological based care with him, which was, yes, different than other chiropractic care. I was more doing it on a, as you please, let's just get him adjusted, here and there, come and go, because I couldn't measure the neurological stress in his system unless I wanted to take an x-ray of his body. And I had watched him start to catch and throw a ball with his brother, which was one of the bigger issues for us. I can't even say an issue, but concern that our family's very athletic and we bonded through athletics, and he had not an athletic bone in his body, but it was more that his brain couldn't process the information, and him and his brother were throwing and catching a ball. And after that, I got to tell you, just as the behaviors fizzled out, I didn't need the resources anymore. I didn't need the parenting books, the references, the time-ins, the timeouts, the sticker charts, you can sleep in my room because XYZ. I had a mat under my bed because he wanted to be with us all the time, because his body was stuck in fight or flight because it couldn't process information appropriately. He couldn't learn. He wanted to avoid people. He wanted to avoid bright lights, loud noises. His body was stressed and it was too unorganized, and he was even getting croup often. And I know that it was related to that vagus nerve and his lungs' ability to process not only lung capacity, but also the immune system and how tied it is to that upper cervical spine as well. And I gotta tell you what, my doors were open to these families and these kids, and I was bound and determined to help every single child get a voice, every single child feel heard and understood, and help parents be empowered to know that they don't have to feel like, victim parents of like, I just get what I get, and I got to try to figure out how to manage this child, and instead getting the best version of that child or the best version of yourself, and how to deal with the stress that your body's gone through. All stress will affect our nervous system in equal ways. More stress obviously affects it deeper, but we want to measure it, and we want to figure out, can we help you? Can your body restore itself? Can you have the best life possible? Can you have an elevated experience? And that's what I've been bound and determined to do, because I know what stress looks like in a home, and it's not ideal, it's not fun, and it's not fun for anyone that's there. So for those of you who are watching who aren't patients in here, our pricing to come in off the streets is $189. If it's a complicated case, it's $300. That's to get a consultation with the doctor, to go through the intake, to get you a scan and get you a plan. When anybody who's watched my webinars or comes to my workshops, I have special pricing for them. It's $100 to get a scan, everything that we just talked about. Sit down with the doctor and say, here's what we found, here's the plan to move forward. I want to offer that to anybody who's watching, who's thinking, yes, 3-year-old myself, Siri, yes, let's check the vagus nerve and see what's going on inside their body, and see if we can help them, and see if neurological-based chiropractic care is what's been missing in their lives. They haven't checked the most important system in the body. Please do that, and I've got a short link right here that you can click on. I also think that I should be able to put it into the chat box as well. If you click on that link, there it is. Fill out the information. Our team is going to get an email that you have bought the $100 gift certificate. It's not really a gift certificate, the $100 voucher for watching this webinar. And they're going to give you a phone call and get you and your child scheduled the best time that's convenient for you. And yes, we've changed things around in our office as far as scheduling patients and having, the amount of people that's appropriate in and out, or teleconferencing if you have an immunocompromised child. But we are, we are here. We've been open this entire time. We've been the only resource for a lot of families who have said, all resources have been pulled from us because school's not up, because that's where they were getting their speech or their OT, or the OT's closed down. And we're shocked at the improvements that they're still making. And that's not to say that the other therapies weren't essential and vital and helpful. But it's amazing what you can do with a brain and the body that's connected to watch itself heal and to watch itself regulate. Siri, yes, a question that I do get is often on insurance, and we do not accept any third-party payments. We do take HSA and FSA. What we found is, just like your insurance company doesn't want to pay for supplementation, but they'll pay for any medication you want. They don't want to pay for proactive care. Neurological based care has been something that's found to be non-essential to them. We tried battling the insurance world for 7 years with very many interruptions and disruptions, and they find what we do to be not medically necessary. And what we find it to be is absolutely vital for the health of our family and our patients' families. So we offer self-pay and self-pay discounts. As I talked about before, you can get on monthly payment plans, and we make it really affordable for families to be able to come in and not only get their child assessed, but get on a plan to get them restored, get them healed, and get them better. So me either. Oh, the link didn't work, really? Short? Okay, let me put in the long link. I do have a really long link that my team had sent me, but I'll try to shorten it. Hang tight. I don't know if you guys can see me or not, but oops. Yeah. Just kidding. Okay, this is what I'm gonna do. That's weird. I am going to send that to you guys. Anybody who's on here, I'm going to send that to you. You got in an email. That way you can get an email with it. You can get the videos that you wanted. And if you want the research, I'll send that in there as well. And I'll link to this recording, and make sure you guys have that link. I'm wondering why that's not wanting to work for you. And of course I pressed paste instead of copy when I did this. So that was awesome. Let me see if I can control here and go back to it. Nope, can't. So sorry. Okay. I will get it to you guys. I learned new information today. You're very welcome, Siri. Thank you for joining us. I'm hoping that's how you say it. I'm guessing it is. But thank you guys for joining us. I will have this replay link up so you can watch it or share it with a spouse, because I know a lot of spouses want to see and hear it and understand it because they hadn't heard it before, because they might think chiropractors are for neck pain, back pain, headaches, as that's typically what people see for their, the toolbox that chiropractors are often given. But when you take a look deeper inside of that nervous system, we really care about what's going on inside of those bones and not necessarily about those bones. And it matters how the brain's getting the information from that more than anything else in the world into the health of many, many children. So I can also send you guys a link if you want the longer version of this, where I do go through every single neurological detail. It's a little bit longer, but I've gone very long right now. And I want to give you guys your time back with your family and hopefully the sunshine and a wonderful weekend, and happy Mother's Day to all of you mothers and everyone. Hi. Yes, Rachel, you are so welcome. You are so welcome. Absolutely. I love watching your children thrive. You're very welcome. Thank you for coming. We've certainly enjoyed you, Rachel. We certainly have. I was just talking about you today and your new puppy. Anyways, I hope you guys are doing something fun this weekend. I hope you mothers are being honored, and I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining me. And yes, I will make sure you're welcome. I get all of you guys the link. I'm sorry about that short link. And any of the playback, you'll be able to watch it. Thanks, guys.